The Medici family ruled Florence for centuries. They built a dynasty on banking, art, and a ruthless ambition that knew no bounds. When crossed, offended, or undermined, their retribution was swift, precise, and often shockingly elaborate. These are the tales of 5 times the Medici unleashed their vengeance, changing the course of history with calculated plots and chilling efficiency. Number 1, the Pope's Grand Comeback and Florence's Fall. Florence had a brief, shining moment of Republican freedom after the Medici were thrown out in 1527. The city had endured the horrors of the sack of Rome, a brutal event where imperial troops ransacked the Eternal City, and amidst that chaos, the Florentines seized their chance. They expelled the Medici, who had returned to power after a previous exile, and declared Florence a republic once more. The Medici, who ruled as Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de Medici, was in an impossible position. He was trapped in Rome's Castel Sant'Angelo, a virtual prisoner of Emperor Charles V, whose troops were busy devastating Rome. Clement, a man known for his indecision, now faced the ultimate test of his cunning and resolve. Florence, his family's ancestral home, his very identity, had turned its back on him. This was not just a political slight, it was a deep personal humiliation that demanded an elaborate, crushing response. Clement's escape from the Castel Sant'Angelo was the first step in his intricate plot. Disguised as a gardener, he slipped past his captors, a desperate act for a man of his standing. He made his way to Orvieto and then to Viterbo, beginning the arduous process of rebuilding his authority. His mind, however, was fixed on Florence, the city that had cast him out. He understood that, to restore Medici rule, he needed an army, and the only power capable of providing such a force was the very emperor who had sacked Rome. This was the core of his elaborate revenge, forging an unholy alliance with his family's tormentor to reclaim his family's city. The negotiations between Pope Clement VII and Emperor Charles V were a masterclass in political maneuvering, a slow, deliberate dance of power and necessity. The emperor, triumphant from his Italian campaigns, saw an opportunity to solidify his control over Italy. The Pope, humbled and desperate, saw a way to reclaim Florence. In June 1529, the Treaty of Barcelona was signed, a document that sealed Florence's fate. Clement agreed to crown Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, legitimizing his imperial ambitions, and in return Charles V pledged his military might to restore the Medici to Florence. This was not a simple agreement, it was a transaction of immense spiritual and temporal power, all for the sake of one family's revenge. The news of the treaty reached Florence and ignited a fierce determination among the Republican citizens. They knew what was coming. They prepared for war, converting their beloved city into a fortress. Michelangelo Buonarroti, the celebrated artist, was appointed supervisor of Florentine fortifications, overseeing the construction of new walls, bastions, and trenches. The Florentine citizens, led by their gonfalonier Francesco Ferrucci, rallied with a fervent spirit of liberty. They believed they could defy the combined might of the Pope and the Emperor. This belief, however, only made their eventual defeat more agonizing. The stage was set for a siege, not just a military confrontation, but a drawn-out psychological battle where the Medici, through their papal representative, sought to break the city's spirit. In October 1529, the imperial army, a formidable force of Spanish and German mercenaries, led by Prince Philibert of Orange, descended upon Florence. The siege began. It was not a swift assault, but a slow, methodical strangulation. The imperial forces encircled the city, cutting off its supply lines. Inside the walls, the Florentines endured starvation, disease, and constant bombardment. Every day brought new hardship, every night new terrors. Clement, from a distance, directed the operation, his patience unwavering as his city suffered. He knew that the longer the siege dragged on, the more desperate Florence would become, and the sweeter his victory would be. His revenge was not just about restoration of power, It was about humiliation, about forcing Florence to crawl back to him on its knees. The Florentine resistance was fierce, bordering on suicidal. Francesco Ferrucci, a military genius and a symbol of the Republican spirit, led daring sallies and attempts to break the siege from outside. He became a legend within the city walls, his exploits offering a glimmer of hope against overwhelming odds. But the net was closing. Philibert of Orange, the imperial commander, was relentless, his tactics grinding down the city's defenses. The Medici Pope's strategy was paying off: starve them out, break their will, and then march back in triumph. This was a war of attrition, and Clement had the resources and the imperial backing to win it. The turning point came with the Battle of Gaviniana in August 1530. Ferrucci, leading a small force, attempted a desperate maneuver to relieve Florence. He clashed with imperial troops near Gaviniana, a brutal encounter that sealed Florence's fate. Ferrucci fought with incredible bravery, but was ultimately killed, his death a crushing blow to the morale of the besieged Florentines. With their greatest military leader gone, and their supplies dwindling to nothing, the Florentine Republic had no choice but to surrender. The bells of Florence, which had once rung with calls for liberty, now tolled a mournful surrender. On August 12, 1530, after 11 grueling months, Florence opened its gates to the imperial forces. The terms of surrender, dictated by Pope Clement VII, were harsh but disguised with a veneer of mercy. Florence would pay an enormous indemnity and the Medici would be restored. A superficial promise of a continued republic was made, but it was a hollow gesture. Clement's revenge was complete. He had used the most powerful monarch in Europe to reclaim his family's dominion. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Alessandro de Medici, the Pope's illegitimate son or nephew, was installed as Duke of Florence by Emperor Charles V. This was not a choice made by the Florentine people, it was an imposition, a clear demonstration of the Medici's absolute power. Republican leaders were hunted down. Some were executed, including the Gonfalonier Baldassare Carducci, others were exiled, their properties confiscated. The Florentine Republic, which had once been a beacon of liberty, was extinguished. Clement VII, the indecisive pope, had orchestrated a massive, elaborate revenge that not only restored his family's power but transformed Florence from a vibrant republic into a dynastic duchy, irrevocably changing its political landscape for centuries to come. His victory was total, his vengeance complete. Number 2. The Magnificent's roaring retribution. Florence was a city of intrigue, beauty, and fierce political rivalries in 1478. At the heart of its power stood Lorenzo de Medici, known as the Magnificent. He was a master of diplomacy, a patron of the arts, and the unofficial ruler of the Florentine Republic. His influence, however, was a source of bitter resentment for other powerful families, particularly the Pazzi, who saw their own ambitions stifled by Medici dominance. The Pazzi, a wealthy banking family, coveted the Medici's prestige and longed for control of Florence. Their simmering hatred boiled over into a plot so audacious, so shocking, it would forever be etched in Florentine history. The Pazzi conspiracy was not a simple act of defiance. It was an elaborate assassination plot, orchestrated with the complicity of powerful figures beyond Florence's walls. Archbishop Francesco Salviati, a bitter enemy of the Medici, and even Pope Sixtus IV himself were secretly involved. The Pope, a man of worldly ambition, resented Lorenzo's growing influence in Italy and coveted the Medici's banking ties to the papacy. The plan was chillingly precise: assassinate Lorenzo and his younger brother Giuliano de Medici during High Mass at Florence Cathedral on Easter Sunday, April 26, 1478. The sacred setting was chosen to catch the Medici off guard, to ensure their presence, and perhaps to cloak the sacrilege with a twisted sense of divine judgment. The day of the conspiracy arrived. During the elevation of the host, the moment when the congregation would be focused on the sacrament, the assassins sprang into action. Bernardo Baroncelli and Francesco de Pazzi attacked Giuliano de Medici, stabbing him repeatedly. Giuliano fell, dying on the marble floor of the cathedral, his blood staining the sacred space. Lorenzo was also attacked, but his quick reflexes and the intervention of his friends, notably Francesco Nori and Antonio Rodolfi, saved his life. He managed to fight off the assailants, sustaining a minor wound, and was hustled away to the cathedral's sacristy, the doors bolted behind him. The plot had failed in its primary objective. Lorenzo, the head of the Medici family, was still alive. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The conspirators, believing their mission complete, rushed into the streets shouting, "Liberty! Republic!" hoping to ignite a popular uprising against the Medici. But the Florentine people did not rise up against Lorenzo. Instead, they rallied to his defense. The Medici's popularity, built on decades of careful patronage and public works, proved stronger than the Pazzi's desperate gamble. The failure of the assassination attempt transformed the Pazzi's ambition into an act of profound betrayal in the eyes of the Florentine populace. Lorenzo's revenge was swift and merciless, a torrent of retribution that consumed the conspirators and their allies. He emerged from the cathedral shaken but resolute, his grief for Giuliano fueling a terrifying anger. The streets of Florence became a theater of brutal justice. Francesco Salviati, the archbishop, was seized and, still in his ecclesiastical robes, was hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, the very seat of Florentine government. But Francesco de Pazzi, one of Giuliano's murderers, was also captured and strung up beside the archbishop, his body swinging in public view. The spectacle was meant to send a clear message: no one, regardless of rank or holy office, was safe from Lorenzo's vengeance. The hunt for other conspirators was relentless. Jacopo de Pazzi, the head of the Pazzi family, attempted to flee Florence, but was captured and brought back to the city. He was hanged alongside his nephew Renato de Pazzi. The brutality escalated. The chronicler Niccolò Machiavelli later wrote of the gruesome scenes. The bodies of the conspirators, some still alive, were subjected to public humiliation. Pazzi family members who had no direct involvement in the plot were still imprisoned, exiled, or had their properties confiscated. The Pazzi name was erased from public records, their coats of arms defaced. This was not just punishment, it was an annihilation of their lineage and legacy. Lorenzo's revenge extended beyond Florence's walls. Pope Sixtus IV, outraged by the execution of his archbishop and the failure of the plot, excommunicated Lorenzo and the entire Florentine government. He then formed a military alliance with King Ferdinand I of Naples and launched a war against Florence. Lorenzo, facing the combined might of papal and Neapolitan armies, responded with characteristic audacity. He bypassed the Pope and traveled directly to Naples, putting his life at risk to negotiate peace with King Ferdinand. This diplomatic gamble, a testament to his intelligence and charisma, paid off. He secured a peace treaty, effectively isolating the Pope and forcing him to eventually lift the interdict on Florence. The war and the subsequent peace solidified Lorenzo's power and prestige. His elaborate revenge had not only eliminated his enemies, but also demonstrated his unassailable position as the true ruler of Florence. The Pazzi family was destroyed, their name synonymous with treachery. The Pope's authority had been defied and ultimately undermined. Lorenzo the Magnificent emerged from the crucible of the Pazzi conspiracy, not just as a survivor, but as a stronger, more respected, and truly undisputed leader. His retribution was a chilling blend of public spectacle, legal execution, and brilliant diplomacy, leaving no doubt that crossing the Medici came with an unforgiving and devastating price. The stain of blood on the cathedral floor served as a permanent reminder of the Magnificent's roaring retribution. Number 3, the Duke's unyielding hunt. In the spring of 1537, Florence was in turmoil. The first Duke of Florence, Alessandro de Medici, had been brutally assassinated by his cousin Lorenzino de Medici. The murder plunged the city into crisis, threatening the fragile stability of Medici rule. While Lorenzino, who saw himself as a liberator, fled into exile, a new power vacuum opened in Florence. The assassination ignited the hopes of Florentine exiles and Republican sympathizers who had long dreamed of overthrowing the Medici. They believed their moment had finally arrived, a chance to restore the republic that had been crushed by Pope Clement VII just 7 years prior. Into this volatile scene stepped Cosimo de' Medici, a young, unexpected heir from a lesser branch of the family. He He was just 17 years old, seemingly inexperienced and widely perceived as easily manipulable. The powerful Florentine citizens who quickly appointed him duke believed they could control him, using him as a puppet to regain their own influence. They gravely underestimated him. Cosimo was a man of cold calculation and formidable ambition, a true Medici in every sense. He understood that his position was precarious, constantly threatened by the Republican exiles who coalesced around figures like Piero Strozzi, a brilliant military commander and a staunch opponent of Medici tyranny. Cosimo's immediate priority was to eliminate this threat, not just for his own survival, but for the very future of his family's dynasty. His revenge would be an unyielding, methodical hunt. The Florentine exiles, emboldened by Alessandro's death and under the command of Piero Strozzi, quickly assembled an army. They were funded by King Francis I of France, who saw an opportunity to undermine Emperor Charles V's influence in Italy. Strozzi, a seasoned warrior and a cunning strategist, led his forces towards Florence, confident in their ability to overthrow the young, untested duke. This was a direct challenge to Cosimo's legitimacy, a public affront that demanded an immediate and decisive response. Cosimo, despite his youth, recognized the urgency of the situation. He moved quickly to consolidate his power and raise his own forces. He appointed experienced commanders, though his own tactical instincts would soon prove to be surprisingly astute. The decisive confrontation occurred at the Battle of Montemerlo in August 1537, just months after Alessandro's assassination. Cosimo's forces, led by Alessandro Vitelli, met Strozzi's exile army. The battle was a resounding victory for Cosimo. Strozzi's forces were decisively routed. Many exiles were captured, including Filippo Strozzi, Piero's father, a prominent banker and a leading figure among the anti-Medici faction. The battle was a critical moment for Cosimo, demonstrating his military prowess and his unwavering resolve. It sent a clear message to all his enemies, both inside and outside Florence. Cosimo was not a figurehead to be toyed with. He was a force to be reckoned with. The aftermath of Montemerlo was a gruesome display of Cosimo's unyielding vengeance. The captured exiles were dealt with harshly. Many were executed, their deaths serving as a chilling deterrent. Filippo Strozzi, a man of immense wealth and influence, was imprisoned. Despite promises of clemency, he was found dead in his cell a few months later, officially by suicide, though many believed Cosimo had ordered his death. This eliminated a key opponent and removed a potential rallying point for future Republican insurrections. Cosimo understood that for his rule to be secure, his enemies had to be not just defeated, but utterly dismantled. Cosimo's hunt for his enemies was relentless, extending far beyond the battlefield. He employed a sophisticated network of spies and agents to track down those who had escaped Montemerlo or continued to plot against him from exile. Lorenzo de Medici, the assassin of Alessandro, was a prime target. Cosimo poured vast resources into finding him, seeing his capture and execution as a matter of personal and dynastic honor. Lorenzo fled across Europe, seeking refuge in France and Venice, but Cosimo's agents pursued him tirelessly, a shadow stretching across the continent. This was a long game of cat and mouse, a testament to Cosimo's patience and persistence. For years, Lorenzo eluded Cosimo's grasp, but the Duke's determination never wavered. He offered enormous rewards for information leading to Lorenzo's capture. His agents infiltrated exile communities, sowed distrust, and waited for their opportunity. In 1548, after 11 years of relentless pursuit, Lorenzo de Medici was finally tracked down in Venice. He was ambushed and stabbed to death by two assassins, one of whom was likely a Medici agent named Scipione Arana. The specifics of the assassination, long debated, point to Cosimo's direct involvement, a culmination of his elaborate, years-long pursuit. Lorenzo's death brought a symbolic end to the immediate threat to Cosimo's rule and provided a macabre satisfaction for the young duke. Cosimo I's reign was marked by this unyielding hunt for his family's enemies. He transformed Florence into a centralized authoritarian state, crushing any vestiges of republicanism. His elaborate revenge against the Florentine exiles and the assassins of Alessandro was not just about retribution, it was about solidifying his power and ensuring the long-term survival of the Medici dynasty. He built fortresses, created a professional army, and established a powerful secret police, all designed to prevent any future challenge to his authority. His methods were brutal, but effective. The Duke's unyielding hunt established him as one of the most formidable rulers of his age, a man who would stop at nothing to secure his family's legacy. The fate of the Strozzi and Lorenzino served as a stark warning to anyone who dared to oppose the Duke. Number 4. The Queen Mother's Deadly Gambit. France in the mid-16th century was a cauldron of religious and political tensions. The Catholic monarchy, constantly struggling for power, faced a formidable challenge from the growing Protestant Huguenot movement. At the center of this volatile landscape was Caterina de Medici, Queen Mother of France, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering resolve. Born into the powerful Florentine banking family, Caterina had navigated the treacherous waters of the French court for decades, often as regent for her young sons. She had endured countless insults, seen her authority challenged, and watched her adopted country teeter on the brink of civil war, largely fueled by the rising power of the Huguenots and their influential leader, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny. Coligny was not just a military commander, he was a political force, a man who commanded the loyalty of thousands of Huguenots. His influence over young King Charles IX, Caterina's son, grew steadily, threatening her own control and the delicate balance she had painstakingly maintained. He pushed for war with Spain, a move Caterina desperately wished to avoid. To Caterina, Coligny was more than a political rival. He represented a direct threat to her family's power, her son's throne, and the stability of France, which she had come to consider her domain. This was a personal affront, a challenge to her very existence, and she sought a revenge that would permanently dismantle his influence. Her plot would become known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, a deadly gambit designed to eliminate her enemies in one fell swoop. The elaborate plot began with a seemingly innocent overture of peace, to reconcile Catholics and Protestants, and to promote religious tolerance. Caterina orchestrated the marriage of her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, to the Protestant King Henry of Navarre. This royal wedding, celebrated in Paris in August 1572, drew thousands of Huguenot nobles, including Admiral Coligny, to the heavily Catholic capital. It was a grand spectacle, a symbol of hope for a weary nation. But beneath the surface of celebration, a darker design was taking shape. The wedding was a bait, drawing all of Caterina's targets into one confined space. This was not about unity, it was about opportunity, about gathering the enemies of the crown for a devastating strike. The plan was hatched in secrecy, fueled by Caterina's fear and the deep-seated hatred of Catholic factions. Coligny, despite the marriage, continued to exert his influence over the young King Charles IX. Caterina, along with her Catholic advisors, grew increasingly alarmed. The Queen Mother saw the need for a decisive action, an act that would eliminate the Huguenot leadership and consolidate her power. The first act of her revenge was an assassination attempt on Coligny himself. On August 22, 1572, as Coligny left the Louvre Palace, a shot was fired from a window, injuring him but not killing him. The attempt failed, but it sent shockwaves through the city and ignited the simmering tensions. The failed assassination attempt on Coligny forced Caterina's hand. The Huguenots were enraged, demanding justice and threatening retaliation. Fearful of a Huguenot uprising, and convinced that Coligny's survival put her own life and her son's crown in jeopardy, Caterina made a chilling decision. She and a small group of advisors, including King Charles IX himself, agreed to eradicate the Huguenot leadership in one coordinated attack. The king, initially hesitant, was eventually persuaded that a preemptive strike was necessary to prevent a larger civil war and secure his throne. This was the moment the elaborate plot escalated from a failed assassination to a wholesale massacre. The signal for the massacre was to be the tolling of the bell of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, a church directly opposite the Louvre, in the early hours of August 24, 1572. Under the cover of darkness, Catholic militants led by the Duke of Guise, a fierce enemy of the Huguenots, began their work. Admiral Coligny, still recovering from his gunshot wound, was among the first victims. He was dragged from his bed by Guise's men and thrown from a window into the street, his body then mutilated. This act was not just political, it was a personal vendetta played out on the grandest stage. The sound of the bell unleashed a wave of terror across Paris. Catholic mobs, incited by fanatical preachers and fueled by years of religious hatred, surged through the streets. They targeted Huguenot homes, shops, and individuals, slaughtering them without mercy. The streets ran red with blood. The bodies of men, women, and children piled up, thrown into the Seine River. The massacre continued for several days in Paris, and then spread to other cities across France. Estimates of the dead range from thousands to tens of thousands. This was not a random act of violence, it was a targeted purge, a systematic elimination of an entire religious and political faction. And Caterina de Medici's deadly gambit achieved its immediate goals. The Huguenot leadership was decimated. Their military strength was severely weakened, and their political influence crumbled. While the massacre did not end the religious wars, it fundamentally shifted the balance of power, buying Caterina and her sons precious time and consolidating their control over the monarchy. Her revenge against Coligny and the Huguenots was complete. She had used a royal wedding as a trap, unleashed a citywide slaughter, and decisively crushed the threat to her power. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in French history, a testament to the chilling effectiveness of the Queen Mother's elaborate and brutal revenge. It showcased her ruthless pragmatism and her willingness to resort to extreme measures to secure her family's future. Number 5. Cosimo the Elder's patient purge. Florence in the early 15th century was a bustling republic, a city of merchants, bankers, and powerful families constantly vying for influence. At the heart of this intricate web was Cosimo de Medici, known later as Cosimo the Elder, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a formidable intellect and an unyielding ambition. He had inherited his family's vast banking empire, which made him one of the wealthiest men in Europe. His true genius, however, lay not just in finance, but in politics. He wielded his wealth not through direct power, but through a vast network of clients, allies, and debtors, subtly influencing every aspect of Florentine life. This quiet ascendancy, however, created powerful enemies, none more formidable than the Albizzi family. The Albizzi, led by Rinaldo degli Albizzi, were the established aristocratic rulers of Florence. They saw Cosimo's growing influence as a direct threat to their own dominance and the traditional republican order they represented. Rinaldo, a proud and often arrogant man, resented Cosimo's popularity among the common people and his seemingly boundless wealth. He believed Cosimo was undermining the very foundations of the republic and consolidating too much personal power. The tension between the two families simmered for years, a silent war of influence, public opinion, and strategic alliances. Rinaldo was determined to crush Cosimo, to eliminate the Medici threat once and for all. He wanted to remove Cosimo from Florence, but Cosimo would patiently plan his own revenge, a calculated purge that would redefine Florentine politics. In 1433, Rinaldo degli Albizzi seized his opportunity. Using his political connections, he convinced the Florentine Signoria, the city's governing council, to arrest Cosimo de Medici on charges of tyranny and attempting to subvert the republic. Cosimo was imprisoned in the Palazzo della Signoria, his life hanging in the balance. Rinaldo pushed for Cosimo's execution, believing that only his death would secure the Albizzi's power. Cosimo, however, had cultivated powerful allies within the Signoria and among the populace. Through careful bribes and the loyalty of his supporters, he managed to avoid execution. He was instead sentenced to exile. This was a temporary victory for the Albizzi, but for Cosimo, it was merely a setback, a strategic retreat before his grand revenge. Cosimo spent a year in exile, primarily in Venice, a period that allowed him to observe, plan, and patiently cultivate his comeback. While he was away, Florence suffered. The Albizzi's rule was marked by political instability and economic hardship. They lacked Cosimo's financial genius and his network of international connections. The Florentine economy, heavily reliant on Medici banking, began to falter. Merchants and bankers who had ties to Cosimo suffered, and the populace grew increasingly discontented with the Albizzi. Cosimo, from afar, used his wealth and influence to exacerbate these problems, quietly undermining his rivals. He made sure Florence felt his absence, that the city longed for his return. This was a crucial part of his elaborate revenge, creating the conditions for his own triumphant re-entry. In September 1434, the tide turned decisively. A new Signoria, dominated by Cosimo's supporters, came into power in Florence. They immediately moved to recall Cosimo from exile. Rinaldo degli Albizzi, realizing the game was up, attempted a desperate armed uprising, but failed to rally sufficient support. His efforts were easily quashed, his power base having eroded during Cosimo's absence. Cosimo made his grand return to Florence in triumph, welcomed by cheering crowds who saw him as their savior. This was not just a return, it was a carefully orchestrated popular mandate, a public repudiation of the Albizzi's failed leadership. Cosimo's revenge was not a bloodbath, but a meticulous political purge. He did not seek to execute his enemies indiscriminately. Instead, his retribution was focused on permanently dismantling the Albizzi's power and securing Medici dominance for generations. Rinaldo degli Albizzi and other prominent anti-Medici figures were swiftly exiled from Florence, their families banished, their property confiscated. This was a far more effective punishment than execution. It removed them from the political landscape without creating martyrs. Records from the period show that over 200 of the Albizzi's allies were either exiled, imprisoned, or forbidden from holding public office. This systematic removal of rivals allowed Cosimo to fill key positions with his loyal supporters, ensuring the Medici's control over the Florentine government. Cosimo then set about reshaping the political institutions of Florence to prevent any future challenges to his family's authority. He introduced reforms that subtly concentrated power in his own hands and those of his allies. He used his immense wealth to secure a new, more favorable tax system, further endearing him to the common people while disadvantaging his remaining enemies. He also strengthened his international banking network, making Florence even more dependent on the Medici. His revenge was complete. The Albizzi, once the ruling family of Florence, were now scattered and powerless, their influence shattered beyond repair. Cosimo de' Medici, known as the father of his country, cemented the Medici's position as the de facto rulers of Florence. His elaborate revenge was a masterful display of patience, cunning, and precise political maneuvering. He allowed his enemies to fall on their own sword, exacerbated their failures, and then returned to sweep them aside, not with brute force, but with strategic precision. His victory was not just about returning to power, it was about laying the groundwork for a dynasty that would control Florence for centuries. The patient purge marked the true beginning of Medici rule, a testament to Cosimo the Elder's subtle but devastating retribution.